Today's topic is co-constructing evaluation questions with your outdoor school communities. And we would like to start today with a warm-up activity or grounding ourselves activity. And so in a moment, 4 questions are going to pop up on the screen. And they're all sort of fictional evaluation questions that we created for the purpose of this workshop, though they would all be very interesting to explore. And these fictional questions reflect someone's or some group's ideas about what quality and success look like at outdoor school. And so what I invite you to do is think on your own. So right now we're going to do this as a silent reflection, but we will come back to these questions later. So what I invite you to do on your own is think about what values and assumptions about quality and success are embedded within these questions. And so you can jot down some notes if that's helpful to you when we come back to them later, or if that's not helpful to you, you certainly don't have to. But the questions are, to what extent do students in the program develop empathy for all forms of life? Do our participants exit the program with a greater knowledge of native plants, their scientific names, and their uses? The third one, are students developing social emotional skills while attending the program? And the fourth one, after attending outdoor school, are students more likely to participate in their home community? Okay, so thanks for taking the time to reflect on those. If you didn't get through all of them, that's okay, no problem. There's not going to be a test. We're not going to make everyone share about 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we're going to come back to them later and kind of see what we can learn about what lies beneath evaluation questions. I'm super curious when we come back to this to hear some of the thoughts that people had as they were doing this. So what are we trying to do here today? So this is focusing in on the outcomes and objectives for this particular session today. So our outcome that we hope for is that participants ask critical questions about who has defined quality and success in their programming in order to co-create meaningful evaluation questions. And so our objectives are that hopefully you and we, all of us as participants together, will identify who defined and defines quality and success in our programming, explore and practice a participatory approach for understanding quality and success in our programming, and hear about the process, approach, and lessons learned from an outdoor school provider engaged in redefining quality and success in their program. So that part, Megan is so gracious as to help us meet that objective in a little while. So I think it's helpful to start off with a little bit of foundational learning about evaluation questions. And so I'm going to pass it off to Deborah to help us sort of build a shared foundation around that.
All right. So as you can see, I have underlined the end of our outcome statement. Much of what we engage with today will actually focus on the first part of this outcome statement, which is around thinking critically about who has defined quality and success. So we're starting with the end, which is the idea is by thinking critically about that, it will impact how we then create meaningful evaluation questions. I do want to just touch briefly on 3 topics, questions, under this evaluation questions topic. I'm saying topic and questions a lot. Okay, so what is an evaluation question? What kinds of evaluation questions are there? And what kinds of evaluation questions are culturally responsive? There is no one universally agreed upon answer to these questions. I will be touching briefly on each of them and sharing a little bit about how we are thinking about this on our OSU team, and also offer a chance for thoughts or curiosities from you. Starting with, what is an evaluation question? So I do want to make an important distinction here. Sometimes when we say evaluation question, people immediately think, oh, this is what we're going to ask on our survey. That is not what I'm talking about here. When we use the term evaluation question in this workshop, we're not thinking about a survey question or a focus group question. This is the overarching question you hope to answer through your evaluation. Some of you, in fact, used evaluation questions earlier when you were sharing what your team was curious about. You already framed them as a question. And so the goal of, or the purpose for taking a moment to think through what the question is that it will help focus your project rather than just jumping into creating a survey or creating an observation tool. Thinking through what you ultimately hope to learn from it is an important first step. It then guides your data collection, analysis, and interpretation decisions. And I think it's helpful to know that most evaluation projects have more than one question. So maybe in the realm of sort of 3 to 5. Too many is too many, but having several helps you look at your program from multiple angles. On the right, I have an example of 3 different research questions related to a plant. So this is very much a metaphor, but just to give you a sense of, in a science fair, the big overarching research question is the equivalent of the evaluation question. And then the methods for collecting that data in support of that come and follow from the evaluation question. Next slide, please. Actually, sorry, go back one slide, Libby. I did want to pause. Again, in the spirit of this is not one universally way to think about this. Just pause to see if anyone else wants to offer a thought or a question or a curiosity related to this use of evaluation questions. Okay, let's go to the next slide. What kinds of evaluation questions are there? There are quite a few, and there are different ways to categorize them. I am offering this as one way to think about it. So some evaluation questions are really about how much we do. They are descriptive and don't really extend beyond just describing what our program does, how far it reaches, and how much activity goes on. A second category of evaluation questions then move into program quality. How well do we do it? And depending how you define that program quality, you might be looking at different elements of your program to really understand program quality. And then finally, the one on the right, program success, or sometimes called program outcomes or program effects, questions about what is the impact we are having through our program. There are other kinds of questions I haven't included on the slide. There's needs assessments, cost benefit analysis, all other kinds of evaluation questions out there. But I wanted to highlight these 3. And for those of you who have like amazing retention, this is going to sound familiar because it mirrors a model I shared last month out of results-based accountability that encourages programs to think about those 3 questions. How much did we do, or the quantity of our effort? How well did we do it? Quality of our effort. And then, is anyone better off? The effect of our efforts. We have also talked about how looking at those first 2 questions is often called a process evaluation. And the third question is an outcomes evaluation. And there are certainly evaluation projects that include both process and outcomes, but sometimes that can be a lot to look at once. I do want to just give a few examples, one example of each. So an example of a descriptive evaluation question, again, this is really just painting a picture of how much your program does. How many students did we serve last year, overall, and by race and ethnicity? Great evaluation question. Program quality, an example. What did students find most and least engaging during their experience in our program? It's not getting at the impact of the program, but just what was the quality of the engagement. And then an effect example, to what extent, I chose one of the questions from our grounding activity, to what extent do students in the program develop empathy for all forms of life? This would be an effect question or a program success question. I want to pause again in case there's any questions or comments on that last one, Libby. Thanks. Does anyone want to offer an alternative way that you have seen, or is this resonating for folks? Just want to get a sense before I move on.
I have a question.
Thanks, Christy.
How, in your experience, how discrete are these buckets versus like questions that might sort of cover some aspects of quality and effect?
Great question. In fact, I think someone, I would have to look back at my notes, someone did this in their example. There would be a type of evaluation question that would say, if a program is implemented with these qualities, what impact, let me rephrase it. Do programs that have more or less of a certain quality have different effects on their students? That's a great question, Christy, because yes, that can be complex to do successfully as an evaluator, but is real gold when you can, to really think about how the quality of a program affects what kind of impact it has. I see a little activity in the chat. Are any of these better than others? I would say no. In terms of the types of questions, it's not that one is better than another. They become increasingly hard to evaluate. It's much easier to count how many students you served than to assess quality. And then even harder than that is to see what contribution your program is making to real change. I advocate for a combination of the three when possible. Steve.
I'd also add to the program success to really truly say that it's a cause of and not associated with, I think is an important distinction, and that folks often call outcomes, right? That it's a direct cause of the program, and there's just a lot of space for wiggle in there. So.
Yes, important distinction. So just because students, that there are many things that contribute to change in our lives. We all know that. We change all the time. Lots of factors affect the change, and that the ability to find evidence that your program is contributing to that change is in fact really pretty difficult. I'm curious how to evaluate if students develop empathy. I am curious about that too, but we will not dive into that right at this moment. Okay, Libby.
Just wanted to add that that was drawn from one of the principles of eco-literacy that, I reference sometimes, but it's not something that we're laying out there as something that is necessarily a straight line to evaluating that. But it's something you could be curious about if you were interested in one of the components of eco-literacy.
Thanks, Libby. All right, great discussion and engagement. Thank you. Let's go to the next slide, which was my third question, which was kind of a trick question because there's no answer. What kinds of evaluation questions are culturally responsive? My answer, and I'm open to others offering thoughts as well, is that no evaluation questions are inherently culturally responsive. So in creating evaluation questions, in many ways, it's the process more than how the question is ultimately framed that will determine cultural responsiveness. And in determining your process for developing your questions, I would encourage you to consider values identifying what your own values are, and also considering values of equitable and culturally responsive evaluation. We have shared in the past a website that is under construction but being improved every day or every week, I'm noticing, from NAAWE, the EEVAL project has some great resources. Their values are now fully developed and online. I've named 3 here that seem particularly relevant. They have 6 total, but really applying the value of equity in motion, of using equitable practices in developing your questions, authentically engaging and collaborating is a huge one, and we'll focus on that a lot today to develop questions, and bringing deep curiosity, including bringing multiple perspectives to the development of those questions in order to be responsive to local cultures, histories, and traditions. So want to pause here again and invite any other thoughts on what it takes to be more culturally responsive as we design our evaluation questions. I think the examples we will be diving most into, and this is Deborah's perspective, feel free to jump in, LSU folks, but is mostly in the middle category, authentic engagement.
So in terms of today and here and now, yeah, I think authentic engagement is the real piece.
There's also, if you go, the link that I shared for the website, and if you click on each of the values, there are some reflective questions that give some, like, how you can start to think about embedding these values into your process around programming and evaluation. That is a good start to help you think through what it would look like to incorporate them. So if you are able to peruse the website, that's a good place too.
Great. And on the next slide, I'm just leaving you with a consideration before I pass it back to Christy to revisit the questions we just analyzed together. So I have a fun little resource, and we'll include this on our resource page, but it's called the Data Equity Deck. And I actually have found it super helpful. And this was one card from the deck. It says, who decided on the goals and questions of this evaluation? Would the communities affected by the evaluation ask and prioritize the same questions? This is really getting at what is often a difference in power in terms of who the person who crafts that evaluation question holds a lot of power in terms of the knowledge we produce and who that's relevant to and what biases that reflects. And so that question of who is deciding on the questions is worth reflecting on.